مساء الخير. Good evening, everyone. We mark today the opening night of Kalimat Literature Festival, a 5-day collaboration of books and culture taking place from the 3rd to the 7th of November 2019 or 18. Kalimat brings together 14 critically acclaimed Palestinian and international writers in nightly public events organized in Jerusalem, Nablus, Ramallah, Bethlehem, and Haifa. Writing workshops are also scheduled in 4 Palestinian universities, Al-Najah, Birzeit, Bethlehem, as well as Al-Quds University. We, the festival organizers, hope Kalimat can be a space to collaborate and explore how culture and writing act as a means of maintaining dignity and hope. Writing in all forms, poetry, fiction, non-fiction, and journalism facilitate experimental reflections, the documentation and the defense of historical narrative, and helps build community and resilience. It is a tool to communicate to audience beyond our own immediate surroundings, and it is a basic means of human expression by which it becomes possible to appeal to communalities in the human condition. The use of this tool is all and the more important for those caught in situation of injustice and for those who are prevented free exchange of movement and access. Of course, no place like here in Palestine. In this light, Kalimat organizers condemned the action of the Israeli border authorities, which prevented the entrance of Kalimat guest author Suzanne Abu Hawa on the evening of the 1st of November 2018. Abu Hawa is an accomplished and award-winning author who was supposed to headline today's opening night of the Kalimat Festival here in Jerusalem. Instead, she was detained and deported last night back to the US after being held in detention facility in Ben Gurion Airport for more than 28 hours. During this period, she fought for her rights, though through the help of the Kalimat organizers and a lawyer, she tried to enter the country and participate in the festival. However, this was unsuccessful. Ms. Abu Hawa will continue to appeal this decision from the US, and one day soon we hope to be welcoming her in Jerusalem to speak. We will continue to support Suzanne in any and every way we can during her actions. We would also like to make it clear that Ms. Abu Hawa is a US citizen with family roots in Palestine that dates back to the 1st century. Preventing her entrance into the country, into her own country, and her participation in this festival is part of an all too familiar pattern whereby Israeli occupation authorities unjustly and arbitrarily determine entrance and exit policies based on discriminatory criteria that target Palestinians and Palestinian refugees, and those it regards to be critical of its policies. In doing so, the Israeli occupation aligned itself with a number of oppressive regimes, historical and contemporary, who view free of expression and creativity as something to be controlled and stifled. History has constantly proven that attempts to curb free expression and thought do not work, as the human condition refuses to be controlled. It is in this spirit that we have decided to bring in Suzanne today online on phone to send her own message. She had a few hours ago arrived to her house, and unfortunately we couldn't arrange for her to be on screen with us. Also, after the detention period and the long travel, we decided still it is important for her to send her own message. So in 1 minute I'll put her in a line and she will address you in a few minutes, and after that we proceed with the opening of the festival.
call her. She said it's not ringing. Huh? Yeah. She's going to try to call you.
She will try to call me. Meanwhile, I'm going to introduce the panel tonight, and then we'll have Suzanne. Tonight we have a fantastic line-up with international and local speakers who will be discussing their work along the... Okay, we have Suzanne. Suzanne? Susie? Suzanne?
She's ranked 5 times so far. It says FaceTime unavailable.
Alright, this technology now is not activation. I think because FaceTime was invented in Israel. So we have a fantastic lineup of international and local speakers who will be discussing their work. Of course, Suzanne was supposed to be leading the discussion, and we have kindly asked Noor to lead the discussion tonight and to moderate the event. Noor is a Palestinian historian and author of several books on Palestine, oral history and the social memory, the Bible and Zionism and Jerusalem archaeology. His most recent book is Palestine, A 4,000 Years of History. He's a member of the Center for Palestinian Studies and the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. And he's editor of the Journal of the Holy Land and Palestine Studies. Not only will Noor be talking about his work, but he will also moderating this event, standing in for Suzanne. Suzanne, in her own right, is a Palestinian-American writer, poet, and essayist. Her debut novel, Mornings in Jenin, was an international bestseller, as was her last novel, The Blue Between Sky and Water. She is the founder of Playgrounds for Palestine and is the recipient of Penguin Best Books Award of Historical Fiction and the Mimo Palestine Book Award. We also have... Can we try? All right.
Is there a mic? Speak.
It doesn't work, but can you try? It have to be from this one. Try with this one. It's okay. People will wait. Also, we have Sylwia Szutnik from Poland. She's a Polish writer and essayist and a feminist. Sylwia graduated from Warsaw University in Culture and Gender Studies and is currently a PhD candidate. Her literary debut, Pocket Female Atlas, won many awards in Poland and has been translated into several foreign languages. She has also authored 10 other novels as well as essays and drama. Joining us from Palestine, we have Fida Julius, who's stuck on Colombia checkpoint, who's supposed to be here, and she will be with us hopefully in half an hour. Is a Palestinian author of 3 collections of short stories. The first one is Hayatuna As-Saghira, Our Small Life, Al-Khawaja, The Gentleman, and Al-Qafas, The Cage. She's a contributor to the Kingdom of Olives and Ash, Writers Confront the Occupation, published in 2017. She's currently working on a memoir of her return to Palestine after the Oslo Accord, and her life as a Palestinian in Israel, provisionally entitled My Return to the Galilee. Joining us from Palestine is Nasser Hussein, who is a Palestinian writer, poet, and author of Asrar Abqatha al-Qudsu Ma'i, Secret Jerusalem Has Left With Me. Born in the Galilee, she has published 5 books and is the co-founder of Ink in the Quill on the Wall, which is a Jerusalem poetry group for young writers. And she curates a heritage museum in Al-Ramle village in the north of Palestine. She has won many awards, including the prestigious Palestinian Young Creative Writer for the year 2015. Please join me in giving the speaker a warm Al-Quds welcome, please. Suzanne, can you hear us?
Can.
Excellent. You can speak, please.
I so wish I could be there with you, but I know the festival is going to be wonderful, and I'm grateful that you're all there for all the readers and book lovers in Palestine. I did to read now. I would like to express my deep gratitude to the Kalimat Palestinian Literature Festival, Mahmoud Mona in particular, and to the Kenyan Institute of the British Council for inviting me and undertaking the expense for me to participate in this year's Literature Festival in Palestine. As you all know by now, Israeli authorities have denied me entry into my country, and I were unable to attest. It pains me greatly not to be with my friends and fellow writers to explore and celebrate our literary traditions with readers and with each other in our homeland. It pains me that we can meet anywhere in the world except in Palestine, the place to which we belong, from whence our stories emerge, and from where all our turns eventually lead. We cannot meet on soil that has been fertilized by millennia by the bodies of our ancestors and watered by the tears and blood of sons and daughters who fight for her daily. That Israeli authorities indicated that I was required to, quote, coordinate my travel with them in advance. This is a lie. In fact, I was told upon arrival at the airport that I had been required to apply for a visa to my U.S. passport and that this application would not be accepted until 2020, at least 5 years after the first time they denied me entry. They said it was my responsibility to know this, even though I was never given any indication of being banned. They said my first deportation in 2015 was because I refused to give them the reason for my visit. This too is a lie. Here are the facts. In 2015, I traveled to Palestine to build playgrounds in several villages and to hold opening ceremonies at playgrounds we had already built in the months previous. Another member of our organization was traveling with me. She happened to be Jewish, and they allowed her in. Different ways over the course of approximately 7.5 hours. I answered them all, as Palestinians must if we are to stand a chance of going home, even as visitors. But I was not sufficiently deferential, nor was I capable of that in the moment. But I was certainly composed, and, as is the requirement for all violated people, I was civil. Finally, I was accused of not cooperating because I did not know how many cousins I have and what are all their names and the names of their spouses. It was only after being told that I was denied entry that I raised my voice and refused to leave quietly. I did yell, and I stand by everything I yelled and the way I yelled it. According to Haaretz, Israel said that I, quote, behaved angrily, crudely, and vulgarly, unquote, in 2015 at the Allenby Bridge. What I said in 2015 to my interrogators, and which was also reported in Haaretz at the time, is this land, and nothing will change that. That my own way of extricated. That as much as they sign magical fairy tales, they can never claim such personal familial lineage. I suppose that must sound to be confronted with authenticity of Palestinian indigeneity despite exile, and face their apocryphal, ever-shifting colonial narratives. My lack of deference in 2015 and choice not to quietly accept the arbitrary decision of an illegitimate gatekeeper to my country apparently got appended to my name and, upon my arrival this time on November 1st, signaled for my immediate deportation. The true vulgarity is that several million Europeans and other foreigners live in Palestine now while the indigenous population lives either in exile or under the cruel boots of Israeli occupation. The true vulgarity is in the rows of snipers surrounding Gaza, taking careful aim and shooting human beings with no real way to defend themselves, who dare to protest their collective imprisonment and imposed misery. The true vulgarity is in seeing our youth bleed on the ground, waste in Israeli jails, starve for an education, for travel, learning, or some opportunity to fully be in the world. The true vulgarity is in the way they have taken and continue to take everything from us, how they carved out our hearts, stole everything, occupied our history, and tamped our voices and our art. In total, Israel detained me for approximately 32 hours. We were not allowed any electronics, pens, or pencils in the jail cells, but I found a way to take both, because we Palestinians are resourceful, smart, and we find our way to freedom and dignity by any means we can. I have photos and video from inside that terrible detention center, which I took with a second phone hidden on my body, and I left for them a few messages on the walls by the dirty bed I had to lay on. I suppose they will find it vulgar to read, quote, "Free Palestine, Israel is an apartheid state," or "Susan Abu Hawa was here and smuggled this pencil into her prison cell." But the most memorable part of this ordeal were the books. I had 2 books of my carry-on when I arrived at the jail, and I was allowed to keep them. I alternated reading from each, sleeping, thinking. The first book was a highly researched text by historian Noor Masalha, Palestine, a 4,000-year history. I was scheduled to interview Noor on stage about his epic audit of Palestinian millennia-old history, told not from the politically motivated narratives, but from archaeological and other forensic narratives. It is a people's history, spanning the untidy and multi-layered identities of Palestine's indigenous populations from the Bronze Age until today. In an Israeli detention cell with 5 other women, all of them Eastern European and each of them in her own private pain, the chapters of Noor Masalha's book took me through Palestine's pluralistic, multicultural, and multi-religious past, distorted now by modern inventions of an ancient past. The bitter irony of our condition was not lost on me. I, a daughter of the land, of a family rooted at least 900 years in the land, and who spent much of her childhood in Jerusalem, was being deported from her homeland by the sons and daughters of recent arrivals who came to Palestine a mere decades ago with European-born ethos of racial Darwinism, invoking biblical fairy tales and divinely ordained entitlement. It occurred to me, too, that all Palestinians, regardless of our conditions, ideologies, or the places of our imprisonment or exile, are forever bound together in a common history that begins with us and travels to the ancient past, to one place on earth, just one, like the many leaves and branches of a tree that lead to one trunk. And we are also bound together by the collective pain of watching people from all over the world colonize not only the physical space of our existence, but the spiritual, familial, and cultural arenas of our existence. I think we also find power in this unending, unhealed wound. We write our stories from it, sing our songs, and debke there too. We make art from these aches. We pick up rifles and pens, camera brushes in the faces. We throw stones, fly kites, and flash victory and power fists there. The other book I read was Colson Whitehead's acclaimed, spellbinding novel, The Underground Railroad. It is the story of Cora, a girl born into slavery to Mabel, the first escaped slave from the Randall plantation. In this fictional account, Cora escapes the plantation with her friend Caesar and their determined slave catcher Ridgway on their trail in the Underground Railroad. The generational trauma of this inconceivable bondage is all the more devastating in this novel because it is told matter-of-factly from the vantage of the enslaved. Another people's collective unhealed wound laid bare, an excruciatingly powerful common past, a place of their own power too, a source of their stories and their songs. I'm back in my house now with my daughter and our beloved dogs and cats, but my heart doesn't ever leave Palestine. So I am there with you, and we will continue to meet each other in the landscapes of our literature, art, cuisine, and all the riches of our shared culture. After writing this statement, I learned that the press conference is being held at Dar al-Tifl. I lived the best years of my childhood there, despite my separation from family and the sometimes difficult conditions we faced under Israeli occupation. Dar al-Tifl is the legacy of one of the most admirable women I have ever known, Hind al-Husseini. She saved me in more ways I suppose she knew, or that I understood at the time. She saved a lot of us girls. She gathered us from all the broken bits of Palestine. She gave us food and shelter, educated and believed in us, and in turn made us believe we were worthy. There is no more appropriate place than Dar al-Tifl to read the statement. I want to leave you with one more thought I had in that jail cell, and it is this. Israel is spiritually, emotionally, and culturally small, despite the large guns they point at us. Or perhaps precisely because of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. We wish you well. Last but not least, we would like to thank our partners, the British Council Palestine, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, Institut Français Palestine, Jerusalem, the Goethe Institute in Ramallah, and the support of Al-Qattan Foundation. We'd also like to thank all the institutions across Palestine that are hosting our events, the Palestinian Heritage Museum, Dar al-Tifl here, and the event where it will take place tomorrow is in the Municipality Public Library in Naples, and the French-German Culture Center in Ramallah hosting us on Monday, Dar al-Kalimat in Bethlehem hosting us the day after, and last but not least is in Haifa, where we'll be in Fattoush, where we'll host our closing event. Kalimat has been organized by the Educational Bookshop and the Canyon Institute. Thank you, Mandy and Tawfiq, for the incredible amount you put into this. Please check out our program and for the full speaker and the events, and we look forward to see you and your friends in the coming cities and the coming events. Thank you for the attending, and now I hope you enjoy the event, and I'll pass you after this very difficult words from Suzanne. It's all over to you, Professor Masalha, who will moderate this evening.
شكرا يا محمود. معلش انا منها بحكي بالانجليزي وبدي ادير الجلسه بالانجليزي، بس بكره بحكي بالعربي كمان. بس اذا حابين تسمعوني مايكروفون بالعربي. اوكي الو، إذا حابين تسمعوني بالعربي بكرة تعالوا بكرة على الناس. أوكي، مساء الخير and good evening. Mahmoud, shall I shout? Okay. Mahmoud actually kindly has introduced us, but I just want to say something about actually this speech. This is probably the most touching, the most heart-wrenching speech I have actually heard from people for a long, long time. I mean, those of us actually who have been actually waiting for Susan in the last 36 hours were absolutely devastated not to have her with us. I was asked last minute to step in and try to fill in a gap, but I feel terrible about it. And I was also slightly shocked to discover that this book actually was also imprisoned. The Israelis can actually imprison us. They can control our land, they can colonize our land, but they can't actually imprison our mind. That's the most important. They can't control our mind. I think Susan is a good example of how they can't do it, and they will never be able to do it. And I think the panel this evening is a good example of some brilliant authors, prolific authors actually, who are also a good example of what I call self-determination. We Palestinians talk about self-determination all the time, isn't it? This is self-determination. Writing a book is self-determination. And we have some people actually who have written 5, 10 books here. So this is the kind of self-determination they can't actually control, and they will never be able to control. I have a tendency as a lecturer to speak too much, so I will stop here at this stage, and we will go through our first speaker. By the way, our panel is narratives and nations, or nations and narrative, i.e. how do you narrate? Narrating. And the word narrative or narrating is actually a Greek term, comes from the word to know. To narrate is to know. And you can narrate historically, and also you can narrate as a fictional writer. You can write a novel, you can be a San Kanafani, Men in the Sun is a form of narrating, which is very much similar to what I do. What Hassan Kanafani did is what I did, what I've been doing for the last 20 years, which is narrating, telling the story of Palestine as a historian. And here we have a number of people who will tell the story of Palestine from different directions and different angles. Mahmoud has introduced our first speakers, also our speakers, but I'll just remind people, Sylvia comes from Poland, comes from Warsaw in Poland. She's a prolific writer. She wrote about 10 books in Polish, of course. Nothing in English, no?
Not yet.
Not yet. Nothing in Arabic at all. Okay, but really very prolific authors about, she's an academic, she's a historian, she's a tourist guide, she knows about Warsaw. She is also narrating the story of Warsaw, or narrated the story of Warsaw during the Second World War. And we're going to have about 15 minutes, Sylvia. And it's all yours now. Thank you.
Good evening. First, I want to thank you to inviting me for this great festival. It's really an honor to be here, but to be honest, our meeting should be different. And this empty chair of Susan is a symbol of what's happening now, and I know this is the literature festival, not a political one, but what kind of people are now in the state who's afraid of a writer who, like we heard, built a kindergarten and a playground. I know that for some of the people, pen is a weapon, but we as writers, we as artists are not a terrorist. We don't want you to hear what you should do, or even worse, what you must do. We are participating in writing the stories to be some kind of a mirror of the society, of the past also. And we, even if we are social activists and knowing what's going on around in the political or social level, we are still a part of culture and heritage. So for me it's really hard to be here, especially when we heard the stir-fried Susan history about the last 36 hours, very close to us. So maybe the subject that I prepare for this evening is also close to this theme. I mean, the whole situation with memory studies and our thinking about the past, memories and history, or even the hair story, the women voices, is still very not so popular. And thinking about the past is usually goes to the historian or the people who are not going to live through the next years. But for me, the heritage, especially the heritage of everyday life, are based on the individual and local histories. And this is very important for me as a writer, not to think only about what's happening now, but to have the metaphor of what was our past. Why? I think that it's not only for remembering, it's also very important to understanding. Without our history and without our heritage, there will be no future. And maybe it sounds more like pathetic, but for me to hear the stories of people who are no longer with us, it's really important to have these people around and have these people as a family, as a part of our society, and still remember about it. Well, like I said before, the literature is about told stories, and we as a writer are some kind of a memory, a bank, a memory cases of stories. And I wonder sometimes what I should call my work. And usually I said that I work in the Museum of Dreams, Desires and Wishes, and also the Museum of the Past. One of my the short stories called Murano, is based on the stories of Warsaw, my country. And like you probably know, in the Second World War, there was a ghetto from the Jewish people in my city. And now this district is part of the city. It's called Muranov. That's why I call my short story Murano. And I will write just a part of it. Writing is for weaklings, whose soft bodies secret tearful tales of love, war and injustice. When writing, you become addicted to obsessive truths about things you have never seen or lived through. But it would only take a little shift in space and time for you to be decaying, buried in a cellar like an old woman or a dry biscuit. But that is not you, yet. You breathe air saturated with the scent of the charred city, which rushed by, separating you from the past, from remembrance. You're alive, after all, but what kind of life is it when you're forever being forced to sniff out conspiracies involving ghosts? Those people must have gone somewhere, mustn't they? They can't all have perished at once. Religion talks of a suspended state between heaven and hell. When purgatory is overcrowded, souls must wander the earth, seeking consolation and temporary shelter. That is the origin of the inexplicable supernatural phenomena described so abundantly in the usual press and magazines. Such stories tend to focus on who got scarce where and what got destroyed in the process. However, none of the stories bother to concentrate on those poor ghosts, what they feel or why they are suffering so badly. Warsaw ghosts. You sit at a round table covered with a green baize, holding hands with other lovers of terrifying tales. You ask questions, but expect no answers. It's impossible to fall asleep in the city, stifling and restless. Your ears whistle to the sound of someone whispering. Someone moves their trembling lips closer and quietly murmurs, Murano. The city shudders to the rhythm of that hateful word, shrinking away, but there is no turning back. The city rolls its mass left and right, like it would in a mother's womb or a boat. Yet still the constant whisper of Murano pierced to the bone, not willing to succumb to silence. Murano, a story of a non-existent city within a city, a tale of ghosts and ghost whispers. as I speak before about our past and be a writer as some kind of a museum of memory, it is important for me not even to not forget the past and the people who were in the places that we are living now, but to understand the past. Without it, I don't think we will come through. I don't think we will take a next step as a society. And I think it's very universal. I came from Poland. Maybe somebody will say like our history, even the Polish Jewish history, is not so usual to your country. But I think that for everybody, some kind of universal remembering and universal say hello to the past is really important to see the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. I'm not going to actually sum up what Sylvia was saying, and I'm going to leave the questions to the end. So be patient with us. You will have plenty of questions to Sylvia specifically about Polish history, about how people narrate the story of Warsaw. But I'm so delighted, excited to have her with us, and we can definitely learn from each other. That's the important thing about it. We are here to learn from each other, and I'm also excited to introduce our second speaker. I don't want to sound, men do patronize women. I don't want to sound, academics also tend to patronize PhD students and students. I don't want to sound patronizing, but I think we have some really brilliant young Palestinian authors and novelists, and some of them we will meet at this festival, and one of them is Nasser. I've just noticed that she has published 5 novels this year. I mean, that's an enormous achievement. Nasser works as a she's from Ramin in Galilee. It's a town in Galilee, Upper Galilee, not far from Safed, which was destroyed in 1948. But we have also some famous people actually from Galilee. Kalimat, a friend of mine, from Rami also. It's a very flourishing place. She told me she works as a pharmacist. She did MA in Jerusalem studies here at the Quds University, and she's planning to do a PhD. So we've got really something really very exciting going on here. And I think she did mention one of her most recent novels, which is Al-Nahru Yajri fi Dami, The River Sails in My Blood. I think this is the English translation of that thing. But it's all in Arabic, Nasab, isn't it? Nothing in English. I hope you will have things translated in English, and it's all yours now. Thank you.
Good evening, it's my pleasure to be here, and all of you are welcome at my Jerusalem. I'm sorry that I will speak in Arabic, one text, one poem. It will be translated in English. Tawfiq will help us to read it in English after I will read it in Arabic. يسعد مساكم جميعا. سعيدة بوجودي في افتتاحية هاي الاحتفالية، وإن شاء الله إنها تستمر. بظن هاي المرة الدورة العاشرة للاحتفال 11. فأنا سعيدة جدا بوجودي كمان في هذا المكان الرائع، متحف دار الطفل، اللي بنصح الجميع دائما يزوروه ويتابعوه في ذكرى الست هند الحسيني. أكيد بشكر محمود والمكتبة العلمية على المساهمة الكبيرة والعمل الكبير لإنجاز هذا اللقاء. اليوم في لقائنا، وهو أكثر ما بين الرواية الشخصية ورواية الأمم، أنا بحب أني أتوجه للحديث عن إصداري الأخير هواجس الماء ونيات الزبل، إصدار الخامس. في إصدارات الأولى كتبت كثير عن الرواية الشخصية عن فلسطين كقضية، في قصص قصيرة، رواية وقصائد نثرية. وأيضا عندي كتاب أسرار أبقتها القدس معي، كتاب يوميات عن مدينة القدس. في النظرة ما بين الذاتي والآخر ومواجهة الرواية أو التعرف على روايات أخرى وأماكن أخرى، هذا اللقاء أكيد إنه بيوسع رؤية الكاتب ونظرته لذاته ولروايته الشخصية. فكل هاي النظرة والكتابات اللي أنتجت من خلال أسفاري لدول متعددة بتظهر بشكل كبير في إصدار الأخير هواجس الماء اللي هو.
Can I stop you for a second? Do you need translation here? If you have people actually who are sitting next to each other, Arabic speaking, can I ask people who speak Arabic to whisper in their ears about the alternative is for me to translate everything, which is kind of will waste time. Is it okay? Of course. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
بتنعكس الكتاب في كتابتي في هواجس الماء مياه الزبد، وخاصة نص نهر يبحر في دمي اللي هو الجزء الأخير من الكتاب. وكان النظرة ما بين الرواية الشخصية الرواية الفلسطينية ولقائها بالمكان الآخر. هذا المكان الآخر اللي بيظهر في نهر يبحر في دمه مدينة شافهاوزن في سويسرا. أنا ولدت في سويسرا، تواجد والدي هناك لفترة قصيرة ورجعنا على فلسطين، ولكن بقي هذا النوع من الارتباط الروحي مع مكاني الأول اللي أصلا تعرفت عليه بعد 28 سنة من ولادتي. ولكن قبل سنتين وخلال هبة السكاكين في القدس اللي كان الإنسان مجرد خروجه من بيته بيكون مشروع لهجوم معين بسبب كل الوضع اللي كان في القدس، ونظرتي أيضا للوضع اللي احنا عايشينه كنت كثير داخلة في نوع من اللا أمل والشعور بوجودي ببقعة سوداء. فقررت إني أنا لازم أخرج شوي، أبعد على مكان آخر اللي أقدر إني أغير رؤيتي شوي وأشعر شوية أمل. فرحت على شافهاوزن، على حديقتي السرية شافهاوزن، وهناك التقيت بظل أبوي. وبحب أشارك بقراءة نص اللي يعبر عن ما بين اللقاء ما بين الرواية الخاصة في المكان الآخر ورواية الآخر. يمر الوقت نسير ونسير، لا أتذكر من التعب الذي أسأل عنه شيئا. نرتفع مع الطرقات ونهبط، أمر بعيني على جمال الأبنية، تعرجات الطرقات، وأرتشف شيئا من ألوان الزهور. أحاول أن أنسى ذاكرة فوهة جحيم تأملت وجهي وأنا أقف في مثل هذا الوقت يوم أمس عند مدخل مدينتي. ثم أشاحت بنظرها ومنحتني فرصة أخرى للحياة. كانت قد ألقت علي أول أمس السلام، وأول أمس خطفت مني صديقا. أتكلم وأتكلم، فجأة يصبح للحديث عن كل ذاك الموت معنى في بلد ليس فيها الموت حدثا طبيعيا أو عاديا مثل ما صار في بلادي أول العناوين. حين سألوني وأنا في لجة الوجع هناك ماذا تشتهين؟ قلت نثر خبزي لإوزات 3 عند ضفاف الراين في مدينتي الأولى. أرفع نظري من تحت المظلة صوب الضفة الأخرى فأراها إوزة بيضاء تبحث عن شيء ما هناك. ياه، إنها واحدة من صديقاتي 3 تحت المطر كنا أنا وهي كل عند طرف من ضفتي النهر. رفعت صوتي بالنداء هي يا إوزة هذه أنا تعالي إلي. رحت ألوح بيدي وأرفع رغيفا صغيرا من الخبز وأزيد النداء. قطعت المسافات الطويلة من فلسطين إلى هنا كي أطعمك الخبز. تعالي تعالي إلي. تبدأ الإوزة من الجهة الأخرى بقطع المسافة صوبي. تهز صقيع الماء وشدة التيار رويدا رويدا وتأتيني. أنثر قربها فتات حلمي بلحظة سكينة يكون فيها إطعامها هو كل همي. تترك النهر لتقف قربي وأنا ما زلت أنثر خبزي على الوحل وأمد لثغرها كفي. فتأتي صديقتها وجمع من طيور البط. لم أسألها أين الإوزة الثالثة ولم يسألوني عمن فقدت. صار لنا الفرح كله في تلك اللحظة. تبتل خطانا تارة بالماء وتارة بالطين. نحتفي عند طرف غابة صغيرة بوجودنا معا. وكان قربنا يغني نشيده يخطف من قلوبنا ألحاننا الحزينة. يمد أكفه يقطف أمطار السحاب ليملأ كأسنا وكأس المدينة. يرفعه كلما نظرناه محتفيا. التقى صغاره أخيرا. هكذا هو النهر يجيد الإنشاد والرقص. في طريق عودتي ظهر ظل أبي بمعطفه البني الطويل وقبعته عند الضفة الأخرى من قريبا من مركز المدينة. وقال: كانت الإوزة مثلك وحيدة تبحث وسط هذا الصقيع عن قوت يسد رمقها. لقد بحثت طويلا طويلا على امتداد الضفتين. آخر ما توقعته أن فتاة مثلك جاءت من مكان بعيد جدا تبحث عنها. في يدها كيس من الخبز وتنتظرها عند الضفة الأخرى من النهر. No, for this no. I will share with a text about the climate change and so many things that maybe most the people in Europe and the USA thinking about that, but we as Palestinians, I think we don't have so much time to think about these things. I will read it in Arabic and then Tawfiq will read it in English. I will stand also. يا شعوب العالم عذرا، تهمني مشاكل الأرض صدقا ويقلقني تغير المناخ جدا، من ذوبان الجليد وارتفاع حرارة المحيط وخلل السلاسل الغذائية ورحلات طيور تغيب والأخطار البيئية. لكنني مشغول جدا وليس لدي وقت كثير، فأرضي كل يوم تسلب وسمائي تضيق، وبعض أهلي مشردون وبعضهم في أرضهم غريب. بحري الميت يقتل أكثر، وصار موتي في الشرق الأنظف والأجمل. أجدني محاصرا كيفما أسير، ألقى حاجزا أو جدارا ولي في السجن أخوة منذ سنين. أنادي العالم وأسأل كيف يكون لشعبي عيش كريم. يتيم أنا منذ عهود، لا أما لا أبا ولا أخا أكبر، وأبحث في وجه الظلام عن طريق أخضر، لكنني أعرف أوجاع غابات الأمازون، ويقلقني حال ثقب الأوزون، وأعتذر حقا عن ثاني أكسيد الكربون حين يطير من قبلة نار لإطار يسد درب دبابة إلى أطفال الصغار. أعتذر عن صواريخ هامت في بيتي حتى الدمار، فليس لدي مفاعل بل كوم حجار. اعذروني أنا مشغول جدا، قد تغير في أرضي حال الأشجار، كانت لوزا وزيتونا ورمان وصارت سروا غريبا يغزو حمضه التراب، يقتل العلت والكراث ويغطي جرائم قاتل الجبان. يا شعوب العالم عذرا، تهمني المجرات والكواكب وما الذي سيحصل لو زارتنا النيازك، وليتني أفيدكم فأنا خبير بأفعال القنابل. سأقبل من ناسا دعوة وسأشرب في سفينة فضائية قهوة بعد زيارة المريخ والزهرة، وسأخترع سيارة أوتونومية، وأتمنى أن يكون لي في كل مجال سجية. لكن عذرا لم أصعد بعد إليكم سلم ماسلو، فقد سقطت منذ عقود في وحل الاحتلال وأوسلو، وما زلت مكاني عند الحاجز عارق، أحلم بضمة وطن واحد لا غربة فيه ولا بنادق، أحلم بعيش كريم ويوم هادئ، أحلم أن أموت حبا لا شهيدا لا أسيرا ولا لاجئ. أنا حالم فيا شعوب العالم عذرا، ليس لدي وقت كثير فأنا مشغول جدا.
Excuse me, I'll try to do my best, but that's a difficult act to follow. Thank you for that. So this poem is entitled Apology to the Peoples of the World. It's a poem by Nessa Adib Hussein, and it's translated
by Sami.
Is there a phone ringing?
You were going to respond,
Excuse me. Bad time. So it's a poem by Nessa Adib Hussein, and it's translated by Sami Kirri. Okay. O peoples of the world, pardon me, for truly the problems of the world concern me. Climate change worries me greatly. The thawing of the ice, the ocean's heat, the failing of the food chain. Birds scarcely fly, and the environment is breathing its last. But I have my own fish to fry, and I'm out of time. My land is daily usurped, my sky is narrowing daily. My people are dispersed, and some in their homeland are estranged. My Dead Sea is day to day slaughtered, and my death in the east is the purest and neatest. From all sides, walls beleaguer me, and barriers enchain me, and my brothers moan in jail for years. I call upon the world, I ask, how can my people live in dignified life? Orphaned have I become for decades. Mother gone, father gone, older brother lost. And in the face of darkness, I search a green path. But I know the agony of the Amazon and the impact of the ozone. I truly apologize for the carbon dioxide when it flies in a kiss of fire and blocks the way of a tank heading towards my young children. I apologize for the missile that rambled in my house, decimating it to the ground. My home was no nuclear plant, but a pile of stones. Forgive me, I have my own fish to fry. The trees on my land are withered, almond, olive, pomegranate, assaulted by pine trees like acid, camouflaging the crimes of a craven murderer. O peoples of the world, pardon me, for I have my own fish to fry. I'm concerned about planets and galaxies and what will happen if meteors visit us. I hope I can be of use to you, because I'm an expert in the effect of bombs. I'll accept an invitation to NASA and drink coffee in a space shuttle after visiting Mars and Saturn. I'll invent an automatic car, and I hope in every field I can have an input. But my apologies, I have not climbed up the scale of Maslow. I've fallen decades ago in the mud of occupation and Oslo. I'm still stuck at the checkpoints, trapped, dreaming for an embrace of a homeland, without alienation, without guns, dreaming of a dignified life, a quiet day, dreaming of dying in love, not a martyr, not a prisoner, not a refugee, but a dreamer. O peoples of the world, pardon me. I have my own fish to fry.
It sounds even beautiful in English, not just in Arabic. It's going to be slightly problematic in English. Fida comes from a long line of Palestinian resistant poetry. Really, it goes back all the way to the 30s, from Ibrahim Tuqan, Mawtani, to Mahmoud Abdurrahim in 1948. He actually wrote, Mahmoud Abdurrahim wrote a poem called The Shaheed before he was martyred. And people actually don't realize, because he was actually martyred in 1948 in Nakba, people think that he became known as Shaheed because he was martyred. In fact, he became known as Shaheed before he was, because of that famous poem. So Palestinian poetry is so famous, and you have a long line actually to the 50s with Rashid Hussein, with Mahmoud Darwish, Sajjal al-Arabi in the 60s under Israeli occupation. We have to understand that Israeli occupation in 1948, after 1948, an awful lot of Palestinian poetry actually was written in the 50s, 60s. And then Tawfiq Zayyad and Samih al-Qasim. And this is a long line of, I think Palestinian poets are among the best narrators of our history. This is my opinion. So I think we need to give a big thank to Nasab, and I'm so pleased to have you. Our third speaker is Fida. Fida is a journalist and a novelist, yeah? Okay. You lived in Canada, and I'm told actually by Mahmoud you wrote about daily life on the West Bank. This actually connects you with the theme Sylvia was talking about. How do we narrate the ordinary people, not just the elites, not just the intellectuals, not just the leaders, not just but also just how ordinary people can actually come across in our stories, and ordinary life and ordinary people who are the majority of people. You know, elites are a small number of people, but we need to look after the majority and narrate these stories, and their stories are important. So Fida, I'm going to let you speak about I think you wrote 3 books or 3 novels, or 3 collection of novels, yeah? Did I present you properly? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I would like to start by apologizing for being late. It's actually somewhat or very ironic. I was stuck at Columbia checkpoint for 2.5 hours. And for a moment, to second what you were saying, Noor, about the personal, with narrating the personal, I actually felt like a character in a story in my most recent short story collection titled Al-Qafas in Arabic, which means the cage. The story holding that title within the collection is actually about a group of people who are traversing Columbia, and the misery and anger and humiliation that people go through on a daily basis when they do this. I'll start by maybe giving a bit of a history of myself and my writing. My father was born in 1930 1938 in Fassuta in the Galilee, which is a small village very close to the Lebanese border. He was 10 years old, obviously, when the Nakba happened. He actually says that he saw the Nakba with his own eyes. He saw people leaving from Tarshiha and Deir al-Asi near us. He went on to co-found one of the first resistance movements in Palestine after 1948. This was in the 60s. It was called Al-Ard, which means the land, together with Mansour Kardoush and Saleh Baransi and others. From that point on, he was in nationalist work. He studied law at the Hebrew University, and eventually his fate was to be exiled from Palestine after a string of detentions and house arrests and hassle. I was born in Lebanon and grew up there for 10 years until the Israeli invasion took place in 1982. My father directed the Palestine Research Center of the PLO. Before that, Mahmoud Darwish had briefly held the post, and before that, Anis Sayed. The center primarily was concerned with economic, social, and political, obviously, research. And in 1983, it suffered a devastating blow after a series of smaller attacks. A car bomb was detonated outside the center, killing several of its employees, including my mother. I was 10 years old, my brother was 6. A few months later, we were among the last Palestinians to leave Beirut, and that very traumatic, tragic chapter in Palestinian history, and we moved to Cyprus, where there was a reopening of Palestinian cultural institutions, but on a smaller scale. From that point on, I grew up in Cyprus, went to study in England, and then out of the blue, the Oslo Accords, for me at least, out of the blue, they were signed. And suddenly there was a possibility we had never ever entertained before of actually being able to come back. Even stranger, we were among less than 10 people who were able to come back to our native village inside Israel. That's to say, the village my father and my mother had left from when they left in 1970. Overnight, from growing up as a Palestinian, from having Palestinian environment obviously at home, from having all of this weight of our tragedy, of the Nakba, of my father's work, of so many of his friends that he lost along the way. Overnight, I found myself becoming an Israeli citizen. And overnight, in order to live in my village, I had to somehow find a minimal form of integration within the Israeli system, obviously as a Palestinian, as I came to realize very quickly, a second, third, or even without much exaggeration, probably a 10th class citizen, as I refer to it. I survived for about 8 years, and then I emigrated to Canada with the plan of not coming back. But in Canada, I very quickly came to realize that home was a much bigger part of me than I thought. I knew this. I thought I would run away, but there was always this pull to come back. And on a visit back in 2009, I decided to come back to Ramallah, and I've been here since. The reason I introduced, I gave you this introduction was basically to say that really in every turn, in every day of my life, the issue of Palestine has been in front of me, it's been in my heart, in my soul, it's been in every single life decision I have taken, and my family has taken, and it has been in the most tragic loss I endured in my life of my mother, who was taken away from me by pro-Israeli forces. About 10 years ago now, I began to write slightly more. I began to write, and I have since published 3 collections of short stories. The first 2, I found myself, the first one actually, I began writing in Canada. Looking back now, I think it was maybe because I missed home so much, and I wanted to express how I was feeling, and perhaps by writing and recreating it in my own mind, I was feeling at least psychologically closer. So my first 2 collections of short stories were about village life in the Galilee. The third, which I published recently, was about life in Ramallah, under, or as one of my friends said, with the occupation, and what that entails. In English, I contributed last year to a book that was done by 22 Palestinian and international authors. It was an anthology of 50 years of occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. It was called Kingdom of Olives and Ash. It was with Mario Vargas Llosa and edited by Ayelet Waldman, and it was really my first foray into English writing, and Michael Chabon, sorry, her husband, co-edited it also. It was my first foray into English writing on a scale that would then take me to the States to do several events for the book and book launches, and to meet many Americans who sadly still did not have, a very, very little idea of what's really going on here, even though they were, sympathetic, they were coming to listen, but, over there I really felt the weight yet again of how much we have to do still for our cause to be known and to be propagated in the world. I'm currently working on the most difficult project I've undertaken to date. It's my personal memoirs. The provisional title is My Return to the Galilee, and here I'm writing all my story. I'm writing my story from the viewpoint of a Palestinian who has maybe encapsulated or embodied all different facets of the Palestinian experience, that is to say, the diaspora, the 1948, or living, inside, and living in the West Bank, and of course, living as a Palestinian in exile. I say it's my most difficult project because really, the title of what we're doing today is very, very apt, because really the personal and the political weave in and out. There really is no way of separating them in a work like this. I find myself weighed under huge events that I try to write about and to explain, and at the same time I keep digging in and out of what these events meant for me on a personal and on a family level. The book will have another message other than my personal story. I'm hoping to shed the light on the discrimination that Palestinian citizens of Israel face inside the state. It's no secret that we are seen as a demographic threat, as Israel calls us, or a fifth column. We are treated as such. The same racism and the same hatred and superiority, sense of entitlement, and so on, with which Israelis look to the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, they also look at those inside Israel as well. It is my hope to shed the light on this segment of the Palestinian people that maybe doesn't see as much attention in writings, in international writings, specifically in English in particular, and to really bring their plight to the world. They are a very brave group of people because they struggle against many, many odds daily in the state of just, the basic battle for survival in this very, very difficult system that they find themselves in. Along the way, of course, I talk about my experience of coming to live under Ramallah, of what it means really, of this terrible open-air psychological and physical prison that we find ourselves in, and what this means for us as Palestinians, both on a personal, on a psychological, and on a communal scale. I didn't bring anything with me today to read. I hope that was enough of an introduction, and thank you all for coming and for being with us today. Thank you.
I think this is actually a fascinating story. I have actually met Sabri Juiz, maybe about 15 years ago after he came back. But you are the first Palestinian to be born in Lebanon and to come back to Galilee. This is something huge for me. I mean, I haven't actually come across, I haven't met many Palestinians from Lebanon in London or in Europe or in many places. But I haven't, Sabri, of course, Sabri was born in Galilee, so for him coming back, but you were born outside. So I think this coming back, it's incredibly important. This return let's keep returning to Palestine. We need to keep returning to Palestine. Speaking as someone who's living in Melbourne, by the way. Okay, so Susan, I'm the last speaker, the final speaker. I actually run the risk of speaking too much, so that's the problem. And so Susan Abdul kindly introduced me and mentioned this book being with her for 36 hours. So actually this book has already made history, being in an Israeli prison cell. And what can I say? The book came out in English in August, and it was actually, I don't want to start bragging, but it was actually bestseller on Amazon for about a couple of weeks. So the book is fairly widely known in Europe and also in the US. And this is one of the reasons why actually Susan actually picked it up in the US and brought it back to Palestine. But the book is widely known outside, less inside. So I was really excited to see it here at the Educational. And I think Mahmoud deserves a huge hug and thanks and kisses for having it in Palestine. This book has to be also has to be in Arabic. People keep asking me, sending me sort of messaging this, and when this is going to be in Arabic. I hope soon. They got in touch with me in Beirut, Ma'had al-Alam al-Arabi, and maybe also Institute of Palestinian Studies. In the 90s, I did publish 3 or 4 books in Arabic, mainly about 1948, about the Nakba. My first book, Expulsion of Palestine, published in 1992, was in Arabic. So in fact, my early books were all in Arabic. And then my middle books, actually, none of them is in Arabic, but practically all of them in Spanish. And I'm just hoping this one will go into Arabic soon, because this is about Palestine speaking for itself. I think one of the problems we Palestinians, they all speak for us. The Israelis want to represent us, the West, the British, Balfour, everybody else, except us not speaking. This is about a country speaking for itself. This is about Palestine, by Palestine, for Palestine, about Palestine, speaking for itself. This idea of self-representation by us, for us, this is incredibly important. And I hope this festival is also about having guests from outside, but also about Palestinians speaking for themselves. That's an important. We need to insist on it. Edward saying, the later was saying, insisted on it, and I insist about us writing our own history. So I did actually publish it in English, but I did publish in May an oral history of the Palestinian Nakba. It came out in May. So this year has been fairly productive for me, and usually, maybe because I'm taking time off teaching, with Nahla Abdo. So these 2 important. One about the oral history of the Nakba, تاريخ النكبة الشفوي وفلسطين 4000 سنة. Young Palestinian wrote to me and said, well, why 4,000 years? Why not 10,000 years? Of course you can start with Jericho. I mean, of course you can start with early civilization. Palestine goes before that. But I think one of the reasons why I started with the Bronze Age, because in the Bronze Age, late Middle Bronze Age, roughly we're talking about 3,200 years ago, we can see the name Palestine in Egyptian sources, ancient Egyptian sources. We can see it in Assyrian sources. The name, the concept, the idea is actually beginning to form. So naming is an important thing, actually. So it was easy for me to start, let's say, from the Bronze Age and take it forward. In May this year, I attended a conference in Amman, and 95% of the speakers were Palestinian Jordanians. And the conference was a 3-day conference, and there were excellent panels about Islamic Palestine, early Palestine, Umayyad Palestine, Palestine of the early Islam, which is about 350 years between the conquest of Palestine by under Omar. By then, Omar ibn al-Khattab was the only caliph who came to Jerusalem to take it over. Muslim caliphs did not come to take over countries. Usually they stayed in Arabia or something like that. He actually arrived in, it shows how important Jerusalem was for Islam. He came to receive it. He came to receive the surrender, and we have the famous Ahd al-Umariya, the Umrah. So this is an important thing. I think Jerusalem from early on was important to Islam, from very early on. But Jerusalem, which we see today, the monument, the Dome of the Rock, was created by the Marwanid caliphs, Abdul Malik bin Marwan, roughly about roughly we're talking about 60 years after early Islam. And I actually argue in this book, I don't want to talk about this book, I actually want you to encourage you to buy it, as it's at the end there, and if you want me to autograph it, I'll autograph it. But I'll just say something about why, what do we see actually in the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque? We see Umayyad Jerusalem in its glory. And I actually argue in this book that the Umayyad, although they had their capital in Damascus, at one point they thought about shifting their capital to Jerusalem. And one of those people who thought about shifting the capital was Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, who created the Muslim city of Ramla. In fact, he was the governor of Ramla, Wali of Ramla. And Abdul Malik ibn Marwan also lived in Palestine. This is a Muslim caliph running a Muslim empire. Almost a third of the world was under Islam, but he actually lived in Palestine, in Jerusalem. And we can see also the archaeology of the Umayyad palaces in Jerusalem. We can see them we can see Jerusalem with the Ramle. We can see Jerusalem with Qasr Hisham, palace in Jericho. We need to study Palestine, not just so I think this book actually argues about, to go back to the story of Amman, in Amman there were excellent speakers, people who knew a lot about early Islam, but they knew very little about Byzantine Palestine, the last 300 years before Islam. And I argue that we can't understand Palestine without understanding the continuity, istimrariyat Palestine. In order to understand Palestine under Islam, or Junud Palestine, or the province of Palestine under Islam, we need to study Byzantine Palestine. The Muslims actually took the name from the Byzantines, and the Byzantines had the whole country divided into 3 provinces, but also run from one province, which is Palestine Prima Samuha, Palestine Ula, the capital of which was Caesarea, Caesarea. So even the name of Palestine, the Muslims actually took it from the previous. In order to study Palestine, we need to study continuously. We need to study how each period and period actually took from the past and gave to the future. I.e., the continuities of Palestine, we don't do it enough, we don't do it as textbooks, and this is my ambition, the ambition of my life. Life is not just to write about the conflict and the Nakba and the last 100 years and last 50 years, it's actually to write textbooks for Palestinian children. This is something I have been talking to a number of Palestinian authors, including Rosemary Sayed comes to me from Lebanon and say, look, we don't have textbooks for Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. They don't have textbooks, the children. And so she did a survey, and she did a survey with Palestinian teachers in refugee camps in Lebanon. And they came back to her and said, we want to teach the Nakba. Of course we want to teach the Nakba. Of course the Nakba is a central event for us as Palestinians. You know, Palestine was nearly wiped out in 1948. But also we need to teach before the Nakba. The long history. Palestine is a country which has existed for many, many millennia. That's something we need to remember. Even when we talk about Israel, people say Israel is not a country. Israel is a state in Palestine. Palestine is not next to Israel. Israel is inside Palestine, by the way. We mustn't confuse the two things. Israel state, Palestine is a country which the British called it Palestine, the Europeans called it Palestine, the Muslims called it Palestine for hundreds and hundreds of years. That's something we need to remember. Also, Palestine wasn't just a name, wasn't just a country. In Maqdisi called it Iqlim, a region, for instance. We know Palestine was also a wilaya. Wilaya means a province under Islam, but also it was a province under the Romans and under the Byzantines, i.e. we need to study administratively, we need to study its currency. Under Islam, for instance, there is an Islamic currency coined in Palestine, struck in Palestine. When I say Islamic Palestinian currency, in Ramle, we have Palestinian currency with the name بفلسطين. مش في فلسطين, not في فلسطين بالعربي, بفلسطين. يعني في عندي فلسطينية اللي مكتوب عليها بفلسطين اللي سكت في الرمل. Coined, struck in Ramle. We have Palestinian currency with the name Palestine, struck in Jerusalem. It was called Ilya at that time. We have it in. Archaeology gives us a lot of things that they discovered. A lot of Palestinian currency with the name Palestine on it. I mean, the name Palestine in gold and silver, by the way. Gold. There's even an Israeli museum in Ramleh actually displaying huge quantities of Palestinian currency in Arabic written ضرب في الرملة, struck in Ramleh, Palestine, بفلسطين. So for the Arabs, Palestine was normal, automatic. I mean, people say, well, Palestine was part of the Isham region. Of course it was part of the Isham region. Of course it was part of the Arab region. Of course it was part of a much bigger context, or of course it was, but it was also distinct. So I'm going to actually make it very short, and going to, I think, Mandy's actually signaling to me. That's, yeah. Okay. So, questions. So what we need to do, you can ask questions in English, you can ask them in Arabic, we will do our best. You can also direct your questions specifically to individual speakers, yeah?
We're going to take a full round of questions, and then we'll allow all the participants.
Okay, do you need this thing, or you can...
I might, yeah, if you, unless you shout,
ما بطول.
I'll try to extend that to...
ما بوصل محمود. هذا مش
My name is Teresa Evers. I'm visiting from Ireland, from Galway City, where we run a literary festival, one of the longest running now in Ireland and indeed in Europe. Over the years, we've brought writers, poets, artists from all over the world. Occasionally, we've had an Arabic writer. Don't ask me to remember names now, but I have always advocated that culture has a big role to play in the Palestinian question. Academics, artists, writers. It's a great pleasure for me to be here tonight. I don't feel confident enough to comment, except to say thank you, Sylvia. I enjoyed your reading. Nasab, when I read to my grandchildren, I acted because my background is theatre. That was the most incredible presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And it was a pleasure to hear your story, and I wish that I could comment further on it. I would advocate that Palestinian writers and artists generally should make more of an impact in the literary festivals in Europe. Ireland and England, Ireland particularly, have some very, very strong literary festivals with writers who, I'm talking about famous names, people who come and vie for places at these festivals. It is a platform which I think is underused by the scores of Arab writers that we have today, the excellence of Arab writers we have today, and project that image to people who don't. A lot of people are very. I come, as I say, from Galway City, and on Saturdays, for instance, there's kind of open forum, basking, people reading their poetry, playing their music. There's one man who's been there for years with his Palestinian table, advocating the Palestinian refugee, the problem, illustrating the political, and of course it's a political question. But we need to get that cultural thing to the people. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take another few questions.
Please be short.
If you want to make sense, can you make it very brief, please?
Thank you so much. That was amazing. I just actually would have one question for Fida, if you don't mind sharing with us why you chose to come back to Ramallah and how that happened. I'd be quite interested. Thank you.
مساء الخير للجميع وشكرا للمحاضرين والأدباء. سؤالي لا نسب بالتحديد، وأنا فدا إذا بتحب تجاوب على هذا. كثير بتردد عنا قضية رواية إسرائيلية رواية فلسطينية. أنا برفض هذا الاصطلاح، هو رواية إسرائيلية وحقائق فلسطينية. السؤال كالتالي: هل أنت بتجدي نفسك لما أنت بتكتبي عن الرواية الفلسطينية هل تسجلي الحقائق اللي موجودة على الأرض في قالب أدبي؟ والشغلة الثانية، أشكرك على الشاي اللي كسرتي التقليد في نظرة للقضية بالبعد الأممي اللي أخذتيه، وشكرا.
Let me just explain, translate this. This is actually a question to Frida about Israeli story, Israeli narrative and Palestinian narrative. And the questioner said, well, there is an Israeli narrative, but there are Palestinian facts and truths, actually. And we need to distinguish between narratives, which can be propaganda narratives, or fictional narratives, or mythical narratives, or myth narrative, and actually narrative which is based on facts and evidence and truth and this and that. So I'm going to ask the two authors here to question. First, Fida, do you want to answer the first question? Let's answer these two and then we can take more.
Okay. Could you switch it on?
شكرا لسؤالك. ردا على السؤال I will reply in Arabic and then very quickly in English. طبعا تسجيل الحقائق الموجودة على أرض القالب أدبي، يعني هذا هو اللي عم بحاول أعمله أنا. وهذا فيه صعوبة كتير، لأنه أنت يعني القالب الأدبي بيتطلب منك أنك تكتبها بطريقة اللي أنت تشد القارئ وبدك إياه معك، وعم تكتب كأنه رواية بدك إياه يبقى معك، وبنفس الوقت أنت عم تحكي عن حقائق تاريخية وسياسية، فلازم تكون أمين إلها. فهاي الحقيقة يعني أنا قلت إنه اللي عم بشتغل عليه هلا المذكرات من أصعب الأشياء اللي عم بعملها بالضبط لهذا السبب. لو عم بكتب بس تقرير أو عم بكتب بشكل سياسي محض كان أسهل.
ليش رمالة؟
ليش رمالة؟ Why I chose to come back to Ramallah. In the 8 years that I lived in Israel, I had a very, very difficult and very oppressive experience of existing as a Palestinian, especially in Israeli workplaces. The second Intifada was happening at the time, towards sort of about 3 or 4 years after I moved back. I worked in 3 or 4 workplaces where I was the only Palestinian, by virtue mostly of my English, not because they were apt to hire anybody who was a Palestinian, but there was a lot of comments and a lot of, this very, very racist rhetoric and so on that you're not even really allowed to question. There is the inherent threat that, any dispute or so on will be taken at the very least to the boss at work, at the very worst to the police. It becomes your word against theirs. When you try to live life on a day-to-day basis, you find yourself really in a system where your hands are completely tied from being able to express yourself. You're carrying all this anger and all this frustration. You're just not, your wings are really clipped in that sense. Also the sense of oppression all the time that I had, that we are, we're turned into strangers in our country because of all these practices against us. The fact that I wrote about this last year in the book I took part in, that we're afraid to speak Arabic in many places in public. If we do, our voices subconsciously drop. We hear remarks like, oh, you've done quite well for yourself, you would never think that you're an Arab. It's this constant demeaning, it's this constant looking down upon us, it's this, constant feeling like you are somehow a stranger, a 10th class citizen in your own country, and it finally pushed me away. The reason to come to Ramallah was very simply to escape from the Israeli establishment. And it was only here, of course, that you see the other side of the coin, and you find that there is no escape. Here or there, it's 2 faces of the same thing, and this is one of the main things I'm trying to say in my writing. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
First of all, thank you for what you said, and it will be for our pleasure as writers in Palestine to come to Ireland. Also, Ireland had its struggle, and there is a good connection between the Palestinian struggle and the Ireland struggle. So I think also our writings, it will be good and speaking to the Ireland. About that question, I will answer first in Arabic and then quickly in English also. بالنسبة لكتابة الحقائق بقالب أدبي، أكيد إنه أنا كل وقت بحاول قديش ممكن إني أعبر كمان بطريقة إنسانية عن في كتاباتي عن القضية، وهي يعني بتصور جزء مميز كمان لكتاباتي اللي هي محاولة وضع القالب الإنساني سواء بالقصص أو رواية أو اليوميات اللي عن القدس، اللي أكيد في الآخر اخترت إني مثلا أكتب يوميات عن القدس عشان أقدم قالب اللي هو موثق نوعا ما وفيه تفاصيل اللي بتعكس حقيقة الحياة اللي إحنا بنعيشها. الرواية الإسرائيلية إحنا كثير بحاجة إننا نعرفها، فأنا كمان بكتب بحث. موضوع بحثي في الماستر كان عن الصراع على هوية القدس الثقافية عن طريق المتاحف، فهناك شفت بقوة انعكاس الرواية الإسرائيلية وحسيت قديش إحنا كمان بحاجة إننا نوحد، يكون عندنا كمان رواية فلسطينية اللي هي أكيد مدعمة بالحقائق، لأنه إحنا كشعب كمان كثير نشغل على تجزئتنا وبحاجة نوعا ما لرواية اللي توحدنا وتكون قوية في الرد. وأكيد النشاط الثقافي هو رد رواية كثير قوية، ولكن إحنا بحاجة أكثر إننا نآمن فيه وندعمه كمجتمع. In English, the question about the writing the narrative, the Palestinian narrative as a fact, I'm trying all the time to write about the Palestinians also in a humanity way, in my short stories and also in my diary about Jerusalem. I choose to write a diary about Jerusalem to write more details about the facts that we face in the daily life, so the people also can read it as short stories, and also it can help them for research. And these facts also I write it at my research. My research for the master, it was about the struggle for the culture identity of Jerusalem. How we can see this struggle at the museums. So I make a comparative between the Israeli narrative at the Israeli museums at Jerusalem, 7 museums, and also 3 Palestinian museums. And I saw how much the Israeli narrative is so strong, and you can see the same narrative everywhere, and also the tourists and all around the world, the people know more the Israeli narrative. So I think that we should have, as a Palestinians, a unite narrative that the basics is on the facts, but we have to think about it and to do it as a united narrative, and the culture activities is a good place to do that, and if it will be, it has to be from the culture side and the people who think about this point. Thank you.
Thank you. May I say just one thing? I think we need individual narrative, also we need the collective narrative. This is the strength, the power of the Palestinians. Also we need to humanize. I think what happened to Susan was dehumanizing, and they are dehumanizing us by occupying us, by oppressing us, by imprisoning us, but we need to humanize people. We don't mimic the Israelis. We don't do what they do. We say people are human beings everywhere. And I strongly believe in what Edward Said used to say, we need to be humanists, we need to humanize everybody. and not to treat everybody as animals. And even if they try to treat us as animals and humanize us, we need to rise above that sort of thing. And I actually like your work. I do like your work.
Also, we have to humanize our us, because we also ourselves, because we look at ourselves generally
as a heroes. We wrote about the murderer and the prisoners as a heroes, but and the mother, when her child died, she have to not to be happy. It's to make something
celebrate.
Like celebrate. Yeah, but it's not a humanize, and she will suffer, and so we don't have to be so strong, and so the literature and what we write, we have to write about this pain and this suffering, that people from also outside, when they look to us, they can feel what we feel, not that we will die and we are happy.
A place for pain and suffering. Yeah. More questions, maybe?
I would like to very quickly add to that point. In my recent collection, for example, I took examples like a prisoner who is taken at 18 years old for basically having a fight with an Israeli soldier and ends up with a life sentence. He spends 20 years in prison and comes out, in his, at 38. He was, I talk about a case that, he was in love with a girl who was with him at school before he was imprisoned. And I talk about his human pain, this person that comes out 20 years later and tries, to come back into this world and to integrate in it and seeks his lost love. To find out, that she was married, that her husband was also martyred, she has 5 children and so on. I talk about, the frustrations of the daily person, the people who work for the Palestinian Authority, and how their salaries are so routinely late. What that does to them on a family level, what that does, they're not able to pay their debts, they're constantly running behind just, providing the basic necessities for their families. I talk about the women, who, let's say, in the refugee camps, who find themselves sometimes recipients of these courses from, done by donor agencies from abroad and so on, that have the best intentions, but sometimes they are so completely malaligned with what these people face on a daily basis. I talk about an instructor that comes from abroad to teach them about yoga and inner peace. And meanwhile, their sons are in prison and they have daily clashes with the Israeli army and so on. So just to really reiterate what Noor and Nasab said, I think one of the greatest aspects and most painful aspects of the struggle is very, very much the human and the personal element, and it's this pain really that needs to be communicated, not just the slogans. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me just thank the 3 speakers, Sylvia, Nasab and Fida, for this exciting celebratory evening. Okay, this is just the beginning. We have plenty for you tomorrow, and you can also follow us. And just a big thank you to the 3 of you. Mahmoud will close the evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much for stepping in, Noor, and for being so brilliant at doing that. And thank you very much, Sylvia and Nasab and Fida. And of course, the thanks all goes to Suzanne for making the efforts to be with us. Thanks for you for making the efforts to be with us tonight. We will continue our journey. Tomorrow we're going to Naples, then we're going to Ramallah, then we're going to Bethlehem, and then we're going to close in the Bride of the Sea in Haifa. If you have any friends, please make sure you let them know where we're going to be. Our press release, which we read in the beginning, as well as Suzanne's piece, will go online already in the festival social media, and I have the press release here printed. Please help yourself with a copy. Putting my sales hat on, the books are on sales at the back, and the authors will be happy to sign them. We have some of the books in Arabic for Fida and Nasab, but of course we have Noor's new book in English. Again, thank you very much for coming, and I look forward to see you in the future. Thank you.